have a sort of an interesting collection of mobile-only folks and mobile-first folks like Lou and Doug here, but also transmedia companies like Activision. So it's an interesting mix. And why don't we just sort of throw open, you know, what's an interesting point you guys want to make to our audience today? And why don't we get Lou to start that off?
Awesome. So obviously everyone's excited about mobile. We're talking about mobile first quite a bit today. I think in terms of gaming, we're heading toward the first $1 million a day game, and that's particularly interesting because it really validates the market as a meaningful platform beyond some kind of incremental revenue stream in the way the traditional console publishers look at it. And $1 million a day kind of translates into a $1 billion franchise. And so when you're building products that you want to become those evergreen, loved games where players just, they love them so much they want to spend money, obviously, spend their time, invite their friends. You really need to think about, start with the customer and kind of work backwards and make sure that you're building something that, especially in free-to-play, doesn't feel exploitative, but is really about value exchange and wowing the customer and building epic journeys. So I think that's a key part of where mobile is going, and the stakes are getting big.
Travis?
Yeah, so first I want to thank Flurry for inviting us. It's awesome conference. Second thing is obviously I'm going to speak a little bit about social because that's the reason why I joined Zynga. I'm a big believer in Zynga's mission of sort of accessible social gaming. And I've been doing the video game industry for a really long time. And what I sort of came to this conclusion of was that video games, or games in general, are always about play, this social experience you have when you're kids. You play tag or hide and seek. It's always this social experience. And I grew up in the video game industry, and what games enabled was people like myself and others to be able to play games against a computer if you don't have a friend available, right? They became an artificial intelligence proxy for a friend. I think what's so great about technology today, particularly mobile phones, is that these amazing tools have enabled players today to go back to the roots of play, back to social play. And I think now you're able to play games through the data connections to connect with friends, whether it's through Facebook or social graphs, or to connect with new people that you haven't ever played with before off the social graphs. And so that's what I think was so important about this space and why I'm a big believer in social, is because I don't think it's something that's transient, that's going to go away. I think it's the foundation of play was always to play with others, and I think these great tools of today enable that now. So I think it's kind of the golden age of gaming because it's re-enabled you to play with others.
Doug?
I mean, I'm going to echo some of the things that have already been said, but to me, like the most important change that's happened in the last couple of years, and the reason why I agree with Travis that there's never been a better time to be in the gaming business is really because of the free-to-play model. I think it's such a powerful change in that it allows, it's easier than ever for gamers to find the right game for them. It's a combination of the platforms, but I think it's much more important that we remove one of the biggest barriers to people trying things, which is price. And once people get in there and they can find that thing and that really resonates with them, then they're delighted. And it goes back to some of the things that Lou was saying about how important it is to ultimately deliver an experience that the gamer feels amazing about. And if they end up spending money in a free-to-play game, that's a pure vote of joy. It really is. Same with their time, if they spend with their time in the game. And I think those two things combined give both the game developer perfect feedback on what is working and not working in their game or overall. And it also allows for gamers to ultimately be happier than they've ever been with the games that they're playing. So I think the free-to-play model changes everything, and I think we've only just begun to really see that transition take full effect.
For us it's a little bit different because we're relatively new to the mobile space, although we've had games out all the way back to the launch of the iPhone with Crash Bandicoot. As a broad initiative, it's a relatively new venture for us. So for us, I guess the greatest vision is that we've always benefited greatly from working with really talented folks. And I think for us in this space, and any space for that matter, the ability to learn and to work with talented people in whatever aspect we're going to be working with them on is really our key vision and our primary objective. So as we launch into a broader initiative in mobile and in social gameplay, as Travis said, finding people that speak that language intimately and working closely with folks that can teach us how to do it most effective, maximize that opportunity from an offering of quality to the audience is a primary objective for us moving forward.
So Dan, you guys are doing very well with the Skylanders franchise, which is above 500 million in revenue in just the last year. And there's a mobile component to it, so it's just sort of one piece of a larger transmedia property. So how are you approaching the mobile side of that franchise?
The mobile side, obviously we had a game called Cloud Patrol that was a little mini shooting game that was allowed for touch mechanics and slide to have risk and reward associated with it. It came out, did very well initially, and we also have benefited with Skylanders from having marketing campaigns around the launches that's pretty significant. So the next version of that in Lost Islands and the battle title that we also put out have done relatively well. I think that for us going forward in mobile, we're trying to just expand that experience to the audience so that they have another way to touch the universe of Skylanders. The toys have been a very big success, and the collectability element of those things is very key to I think, the compelling nature of the gameplay. And I think we'd like to find a way to complement that with a digital version, a collectability element, to borrow in my opinion, one of the greatest collectability games, Pokemon, in the history of games, to take that element of addictive nature of wanting to collect them all and tie that into a digital representation so that I have a way to track that in my pocket is a real key element of, I think, what we want to try and do with it. But primarily right now, we're just trying to find a way to offer more services for the brand and the universe to get more people bought into. Our CEO has a great phrase. He says, a product is something you buy, and a franchise or a universe is something you buy into. And so I think for the mobile initiative is allowing us to have people buy into the universe and the franchise in the same way that we've had people buy into Call of Duty.
So you guys all sort of share the same problem of when you launch a game, it'll be one of 500,000 games in the app stores, I guess. How do you approach this problem? Anybody can
Well, from my standpoint, again, the first approach is to make your product free. So remove that barrier right away. If you slap even a 99-cent price point on it, it can have a devastating effect to the accessibility of the product. And as much as discoverability is definitely a challenge, I think it's better than it's ever been from any producer's standpoint, in that there's such vast channels, and that can be online through Facebook. I mean, that's 1 billion active users, or it can be through the mobile smartphone industry, both of which are at scales that the best thing you can do is just make your product available. And if you have some extra resources that you can smartly leverage some of the marketing channels that can put your products in front of the right people very efficiently, and you have the discipline of looking at your KPIs to make sure that you're not exceeding the amount of money that you think you can make from a given user, you can be very, very aggressive, particularly if you figured out how to delight someone and you have a game that's doing that. It'll lead you, and it'll lead itself ultimately to the users.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think his point on free gaming is super important, and kind of on the social aspect of it, from our perspective, the reason why that's also so important is that imagine you have a game that you want to play with friends and family, and you see this game, you're like, oh, this game is great. You discover it because it's free. The game, of course, has to be of the highest quality for two reasons. One, because it's free, you can simply move away from it if it's not of high quality. So I think free games have some of the highest bars of quality to achieve because you have that one moment for the user to try it and move on. The reason why for social it's so important is that once a user plays this game and they like it, hopefully, then they want to invite their friends and family. They either do that through word of mouth, and one of the great things about mobile phones, it's a lot of word of mouth. You're sitting in places like this, or you're saying, hey, check this out. You lean over and show Lou the game, and he's like, cool, I want to get that. But if the game's paid or if it's of low quality, he's not going to play it with me. And so for me to make that social connection and to have a great game experience with one of the folks here in the audience, I've got to convince you to download it and play it, either by word of mouth or through any number of methods. So the game has to be free, or it really diminishes your chance of having friends play with you. And it's got to be of the highest quality, because your friend's going to play this game. I don't want to play this game. Even if you sort of like it, it's got to be at the best levels of quality. So I think that's one of the ways that games are discovered, are they have to be free, of high quality. And then for us on the social side, playing game with others drives word of mouth. It drives additional channels of discovery, because you want to reach out to your friends and play it with them. So some of the largest games in the industry are social games, because they power those other channels of discovery. And that's partly how our games are discovered and move in the App Store.
And Dan, free-to-play is kind of a hard thing for you guys to swallow if you're selling $60 games, right? So
I would maybe look at it differently. It's not hard for us to swallow. It's hard for us to learn the language and understand how to speak it effectively. And it's something that we're applying a great deal of energy into. We believe that retail will have a very solid place in the gaming business for products. And we also believe that there are services that can be provided, whether they be free or whether they be microtransacted or whether they be through downloadable content. I'm honestly not an expert on the different models around it, but I will say that I think that for us, we've been pretty effective historically in retail. And understanding a different language is sometimes uncomfortable. And so we are applying a lot of energy. As you know, the one thing I can say about the company that I'm very proud of is that we remain very humble about where we are in our position in the business, and we're confident we will find the answer, and even if we have to work twice as hard, we'll get there. So, you know, as I said, we're in our infancy when it comes to this space. When it comes to free-to-play in general, whether it be in the browser or mobile, and, you know, you guys have all kind of lived in that space for quite a lot longer. We just have to understand that language and understand live services and be comfortable with the idea of launch and learn versus, you know, fire and forget. You know, in retail, you put a product out there, it's fully baked, and you hope that everybody loves it, and you kind of hold and wait. And in this space, in the space that you guys have been in for so long, you benefit from putting something out there and calling it beta, and then getting real live data from the people experiencing what you just created. And then you have a live services team that puts titles out there or puts features into the product based on what the appetite of the consumer is telling you. I think that's a real special mechanic. I love that. I love it.
So there was an interesting set of data from Digit Capital, an investment bank, this week about how game mergers and acquisitions generated $4 billion in value in 2012. But the investments into game companies fell 57% to something like $850 million compared to the year before. Mobile is a huge part of the pickup in the number of transactions of game investments, but the average amount of money going into each deal has dropped a lot, down from like 13 million down to 5 million or so. So I guess a question there is, like, where are we in a cycle in terms of where mobile gaming is and where it's going?
I would say that we're really still very early, and I think Supercell's story is actually a perfect example of why. You know, a new company, first product out, does incredibly well. They obviously
tablet game focused. Yeah.
Yep. First product out does super well. Players love it. It is social, so they're kind of engaging with folks offline, and that's kind of the beauty of the digital marketplaces versus some of the traditional retail, is that you can have a great product, it can rise to the top, and you don't need to have all of the infrastructure or 10 years of relationships to get that first product out. It's risky in other ways.
And so what kind of predictions might you guys have about 2013, given where we are in a cycle? What's going to happen?
Predictions. All right, I'll throw one on the table. It's always fun to do predictions. So one that I think is both a learning and insight in the business that we believe in, but also I think it's going to continue to grow, is that there's different ways of communicating with others, again, always from a social perspective, because that's our view of the world. But when I talk about communication and your ability to communicate with others, there's obviously two fundamental forms. One is asynchronous or highly interruption-tolerant forms of communication, and they're sort of synchronous in real time. And I think on the mobile side, it's leaned heavily towards asynchronous. And what I mean by that is, let's use forms of communication as a foundational principle. On mobile phones, most people nowadays, at least the people I hang out with, text message more than they do phone calls. And the reason they do that is that text messaging is a great form of highly interruption-tolerant communication. And it allows for you to do things intermittently. It's a great mobile experience. On tablets, synchronous is probably a better form, or at least has more ability there, because that's destination play. That's something you sit down to do in depth. And so what I think you'll see, and while both work in each platform certainly, I think what you'll see going forward in this next year and the years to follow are companies to lean with new game genres and new game types more deeply into asynchronous on mobile platforms, phones, and then people to lean more heavily on synchronous and real-time play on tablets. And you'll see those different experiences play out over the next kind of coming years.
You know, sort of building on that, I think there's going to be, you know, there's already and will continue to be increased investment and a lot more options for deeper, richer, longer session gameplay, because I think sort of building on some of the things that Travis just said, that use of whether it's intermittent and interruptible, sort of shorter session duration is very typical for when I think you're away from the home, you're not sitting down on the couch. On an earlier panel, someone mentioned that 68% of mobile device usage is in the home, actually. I mean, that doesn't mean you're not in an interrupted state necessarily in the home, but it means that a significant portion of it isn't and is available for longer session use. And that just is talking about the accessibility and the permanent state of on that your mobile devices are. So, and what that's going to enable is those longer sessions are going to enable deeper, richer gameplay, the power of the hardware, the better infrastructure that's going to be supporting different kinds of synchronous gameplay and at a high quality. It's really going to change the nature of which products I think we see at the top of the charts. And I think it's going to go more towards what people would traditionally call hardcore.
So Rage of Bahamut was at the top for a long time in 2012. Can you talk about maybe why it stayed up there so long?
Honestly, I think that's more of it's a reflection of the right product finding its right target. So a lot of the things I was talking about before about making it free. So like, let's be honest, card battle games are not exactly the largest genre in the history of gaming. And so for a game to do what Rage did this year, it was fundamental that it be free and that it have the time to go find that audience. And then all the things about the model, about iterating upon it, making sure it's working, and really having that live service mentality about what makes that game successful. It was all those things that ultimately contributed to that success. But what I think that showed is you don't need tens of millions or even millions of people necessarily playing a game every day in order to have a dominant financial performance. And it was free, so the people that were paying and sticking around in that game love it. And they're super passionate about it. It was just the right product having the ability to find its niche.
Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to make a forecast, but I will tell you what I would love as a consumer. I would love a consolidation of experiences, so no matter what device I'm on, there's persistence across my screens. So, I'm very fortunate to be able to travel quite a bit, which means, I forgot the name of the movie with George Clooney, but, he's kind of a loyalty program guy. Well, that's kind of me. I have my different cards. If I can consolidate all those things and then actually accrue value for every time I spend time in a game or in a universe, and I could accrue value for that, and then I could put it into a bucket and then redeem it in whatever environment I want to redeem it, that would be a fantastic thing. It feels to me like that would be pretty compelling, especially for point of sale. If you look at partnerships with retail and or Starbucks or something like that, it would be compelling for me as a consumer, and I'm sure that many of you guys will figure that out. I'm just not, I don't think I'm qualified to forecast against it, but I'd love to see it.
What do you guys think about iOS versus Android and the state it's in right now?
I think they're both awesome. And I'm actually serious. I'm not just saying that for our friends at Apple and Google. Right now we have 3 games I think in the top 6 of the top grossing charts on Android and 2 in the top 10 on iOS right now. So, we found success on both platforms. I think they share a lot of similarities. Android sometimes gets knocked because it theoretically doesn't monetize. We certainly have not found that to be the case. We've seen very similar monetization patterns for games when they find their right niche on both platforms, and so we really focus in on that. And obviously, both platforms are just growing, at such a crazy pace. I mean, it was really exciting to watch some of the things that happened over the holidays as all these new devices got activated. It's an incredibly great time to be on those platforms. They're just growing like crazy, and it's the classic analogy of a rising tide right now, and we've got boats.
So I just came from the Consumer Electronics Show, and it seemed like there were lots of different kinds of alternatives to consoles in the home that were arising here. And NVIDIA, announced their Project Shield to take an Android controller-driven display device into the living room through a connection on an HDMI cable. There was the Steam box as well that might bring Steam downloadable games either through NVIDIA or directly into the Steam box on your television. Lots of talk about Android on smart TVs. What do you guys think about this new sort of path?
I think I agree with him on that we're fans of all these platforms. I think more platforms is generally a good thing. It creates more choice for our players. I think from our perspective, we can watch the platforms and see at what point there's enough sort of user density to generate a meaningful social experience. Some of these platforms are new and they have to generate enough users for them to just be meaningful, to find friends to play with. And if you have a bunch of friends playing on iOS and Android and platforms at scale, you have lots of friends there to play with. Some of these new platforms they haven't quite gotten to scale yet, but we love them. We love more choice for our consumers and our players. And as those things become successful, we'll certainly go where our players are.
Will smart TV games disrupt console games?
Yes.
Likely.
Yeah.
Dan, what do you think about that?
I love disruption. I think that it forces those of us who get too comfortable to continue to innovate. I think that's a great thing. I think that Skylanders is actually a great example of that. I don't think that when we started out, when I should say Toys for Bob and the development group ventured out on that, down that path, I don't think they ever thought in a million years that they'd be making toys to be a companion, especially after our Guitar Hero experience, which was very, very good in some ways and yet very challenged in others. However, they were faced with challenges of how to make the content compelling, and they found a toy mechanic and they found a little portal thing, and all of a sudden it's magic. But that comes from the necessity towards innovation. I love disruption. I don't actually know how smart TVs are going to impact. I think at some point it becomes invisible to the consumer, right? So where you put your content or from where you pull that content, you display it on a thing and it becomes invisible or transparent to you. I think that that's eventually where it goes. I just don't know how.
So I'm going to open it up to audience questions soon, but I'll ask one more. In this smart TV environment, does a controller matter? I mean, Njimoko just showed off a very interesting shooter game that you can play, without any controller, but with the touchscreen. So do you have to think about investing in games that can be played with controllers or games with touchscreens?
Yeah, to my way of thinking, and you mentioned the drowning, when we've been developing that game now for a while, so it was something that we really thought was an opportunity in the category, where if you looked at traditional or most mobile FPS games, they were still using virtual sticks, which was pretty frustrating personally. I didn't find that to be a super great UI and interaction design. And the idea that you could throw that out and start over, and you've got this touchscreen, which in and of itself is this incredibly accessible UI, and was a really cool way. And the way that team dug in and just iterated and tried things and played, Counter-Strike maps like to death so that they could actually see where the real frustration points were with the control scheme was a really cool example of the innovation. And I think the result is going to show that the innovation that's possible right now is profound and will open up the category dramatically to more people and that experience to more people. So I think thinking about interaction is one of the biggest opportunities right now as we move into a series of new devices and new interaction schemes. So whether it's a new controller or it's the touch screen, like that is a wide open opportunity for people to really change the accessibility of these products.
All right, I did see a hand go up in the middle right there. I think we have a microphone that will, great.
Hi, this is a Flurry-esque question. So I was wondering, for analytics, how do you evaluate the success of a new game feature? And on the other hand, how do you or what structures do you have in place to help you break out of the local maxima that the analytics could kind of drive you towards?
So, sorry, just if the question is sort of like, how do we use analytics to evaluate a new game feature?
Yes.
Okay. For us, I mean, I'll take an example of like if we were going to put in a new event or something like that into one of our products, a new event scheme, which is really about how do we create engaging, ongoing, almost episodic content for gamers who are playing a game, keep them coming back and interested, and keep providing new value for them. It is rigged so densely, and the analytics are so comprehensive to try to see exactly where people are dropping off, which elements they're struggling with. So we're looking at interaction, in terms of like length of duration between steps, and obviously drop-off points. But ultimately it rolls up to, is this coming back to the thing that in a free-to-play model means people like it? What's happening to our retention rates as a result of this? What's happening to our ARPDAU as a result of this? These are the core metrics. What's happening to the K factor that we can see on the games? Are people sharing this? Are they excited about this? Are things going up? Those three core elements really define whether or not people like something or don't like something, and it's the simplest way to tell.
Another question from the audience?
Can you share a little bit about the KPIs when going live with a new free-to-play game? When you know that the game is doing well as far as retention, which KPIs you're looking for, and as far as monetization?
I think it really depends on the type of game, to be honest. I'm not trying to dodge the question. It really depends. If it's something that you think is incredibly broadly appealing, like it has a very large sample, you're going to expect there is a inverse correlation as a product scales. KPIs tend to get eroded, but as a business, you're really looking overall at the end of the day, like where are my best gross revenue or net revenue, depending on the situation, opportunities, and how do I maximize that? So it's not about like this game has to have X level of ARPDAU and Y return rate. I mean, there is that, because if it doesn't have that right out of the gate, then you know right away that it's not a viable product, and you should be moving on quickly. And I would say for us, we're looking at early on in the game's life cycle, we need to have ARPDAU well north of 30 cents, across very consistently. We need to have return rates on at least a day 7 level of at least 15% or higher, just to know that a game has some viability. And otherwise, we'll quickly move on. Once, we might try to tune things if it's close, if we're seeing some opportunity, but we'll very quickly move on from titles because the gamers, they're telling us exactly what they don't like in that situation, and it would be disrespectful to try to keep flogging that to them and a waste of money.
Another question? Who's got a mic? Okay, whoever.
Hi, so you touched on something really interesting, which is the timing. So at what point, is there slow growth for a game? What is it, like a month, a year? At what point do you call it quits, basically?
Well, I can speak for us and the answer is there will be success stories that are outliers, what I'm about to say, like things that, like people invested lots, years in, and finally it found its right kind of combination, and vice versa. But for us, within 3 months, we feel like that's enough time after you've initially allowed users to get into the game environment that you have an extremely good read on where that product's gonna end up. And we'll invest, if we think there's some encouraging signs within there that we think an additional investment could warrant, we'll invest another 3 months. But by 6 months, if you don't have that game working, then we will move on.
Yeah, I'd also agree with that. I think we were talking about this backstage actually, but I think you typically know pretty quickly whether your game is successful or not. With the amount of information that flows in the mobile space and the amount of liquidity, these games can move extremely fast. For us, it's a little bit more of an analysis of the data that you get from the game. You can sort of decide how much you want to invest in tuning that game to bring it to a place where it is well suited for your market, if there's things you need to change. Or you can look at that amount of time you're going to invest in changing the game until it's right to building another game that you've learned from your first game. And I think that's part of the service model. And it's really a decision on how you want to spend your great talented resources, whether they want to continue to invest in trying to tweak that game if it's not successful out of the gate, or build another game with those learnings. If the game's, of course, successful, then you continue to lean in on it. But you know pretty quickly.
One thing I would add to that is, especially if you're in a limited market, and it becomes kind of popular, but maybe you're not seeing monetization that you want, at least if it's popular and players are engaged, it tells you to continue to go and iterate, versus something where you have really, really bad fall off on day 2 or day 3. It's just the wrong product. The other thing you can look at is how engaged they are with all the different kind of core systems. If they're actually really engaging with the game, say it's, we use Call of Duty because it doesn't actually exist in free-to-play, but if players are in combat but they're not actually engaging in, say, weapons customization, you're failing on some really critical pieces. And so you can look at that. Maybe they're loving the run and gun, but they're not involved in some of the other things that you think are important.
I'll ask the last question. When you think about external events that could affect mobile gaming, there might be things like new console introductions that will affect this business, or even something like Disney Infinity's launch, this week of cross-platform transmedia play. Those are big events. But what other sort of big events do you foresee that are sort of internal mobile gaming industry events that are going to affect your business in a big way? So just last question, quick answers from everybody.
I'll do a quick shot. I think mobile phone is one of the greatest tools invented in a recent time. I think it's amazing. So I think it'll be things in the mobile industry that create disruption. I think new billing models, better forms of communication, better forms of service for players are the things that'll disrupt this industry the most today. And I think we're looking forward to those. Again, they're going to be, if they're adopted, that means they're providing a lot of value to our players. So we're looking forward to that.
Luke?
I think there's and you asked for predictions earlier, so I'll make mine right now. The quality bar is rising faster than I think a lot of teams can keep up with, in terms of graphics and interaction between players. And all of those things make products more expensive and make it harder for indie teams to kind of do their own thing. And I think that's going to it's going to have an impact on how people think about the business.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that. I think that the door that kind of slams shut in the social environment for indie developers a little bit is coming on mobile. The cost of development from a quality standpoint and the cost of competing from a discoverability standpoint. And not that there aren't ways to get around both of those things to a certain extent, but on average, that's going to increase, and it's going to increase rapidly. And as a result, it's going to take more resources. And people, you mentioned earlier smaller bets that are being taken. That's not going to be super deep cash pockets or things that can sustain significant burn for a long period of time. And that's going to create a lot of consolidation in the business, I think.
I'll take a different perspective on it, only from a different angle. I think that I'm a strong believer in social currency. So if I have a network of friends, and you know, in the old days when I used to race home to go watch a show before I could record it, I did that so the next day I went to work, I could talk about it with my friends around the water cooler. Same thing with Monday Night Football or anything else, fantasy football over the weekends. I think that social currency, there will be some impactful thing that will guide audiences either to look at closer or to move away from certain trends of gaming, whether it be console, mobile, or whatever device you're playing on. I'm not sure exactly what the social currency driver will be, but I'm a strong believer that we kind of move in packs, and I think that that happened obviously in the browser for a long time, and I think it's happening in mobile right now, and it becomes kind of a coolness factor. I have a daughter in college, and I learned more in 5 minutes of conversation from her about what her friends are interacting with and what they're compelled to do with their time than I do with any amount of research that I can read online. And it's just fascinating to understand how that viral nature of community is created and how variable it is and how they move and flow off of each other's actions. It's fascinating to me. So I think at some point this year there will be something like that that will move audiences from one platform or one genre or one part of experience to another.
Thank you, everybody.